local user groups tend to be more an issue of building a social network, especially getting people familiarized with the issues, also just acting as a kind of support network for people who do not, for example, have the ability to pay for a commercial support network. So one thing they're doing in this area, for example, is they're making these, I think it's once a month, they're having install fests, which means that people who have problems getting Linux installed on their machine or have some issue, I mean, maybe they've actually installed Linux but want to set up the network in a specific way, can actually bring in their machines to this users group meeting. And there's a lot of people there willing to help who've maybe seen that problem before.
So the card that only connects locally, go back to the card.
Well, actually things aren't going so well. I tried it earlier myself. I had problems, and so I came to this install fest where all the gurus abound. Hopefully I'll have better luck getting it in.
Instead of having sending emails or writing to news groups on the internet and waiting several days for the answer sometimes, it's easy to come here and find other people who might know about your problem and may be able to help you. And hopefully within a few hours you have your machine installed.
Originally I wanted to install on my larger laptop, and so I just did a search on the net and found where there were resources to get help. And I'm here today because I'm trying to put Linux on this little guy right here, which is a Toshiba Libretto. And it's not the easiest thing in the world to do because it's a weird piece of hardware. So, do you have any chairs around here?
I think the Department of Justice case has made people aware of the fact that you should at least look for alternatives to Microsoft, and maybe Microsoft isn't the American dream after all. And that kind of shift in perception, you can very clearly see that people just took Microsoft for granted. And maybe they're still buying Microsoft, but at least they're kind of more aware of the issue these days.
Microsoft actually used Linux as defense. They used Linux to ground a claim that they don't have a monopoly because Linux could essentially push them off their catbird seat at any time. It was a very ingenious argument, totally specious, because it didn't do anything to answer the charge that they had previously engaged in bullying and various anti-competitive practices. But it was clever of them. In an event, the judge didn't buy it.
Well, ordinarily we in the Linux community are rather wary about letting Microsoft become the issue, but there was a Slashdot article about December of '98 where a fellow named Matt at the Noodle had pointed out that a gentleman in Australia had managed to receive a refund for the unused copy of Windows that came with his computer. So he declared the 19th of January, was it January?
No, it's February.
It's February, I'm sorry, the 19th of February. He declared the 19th of February Windows Refund Day, and he encouraged everyone to go to their computer manufacturers and return their unused copies of Windows as it was specified in the Windows End User License Agreement.
Yeah, it's important to remember that in the license itself it says that you can receive a refund if you don't use the software, and that the manufacturer is bound by law to do this, or it was bound by contract. And we found that, if you called up these manufacturers, they basically said, "Stop bothering me, kid," and hung up on you. We didn't really want to sort of give out the location of where we were going to meet until at the very last second. So what we did is we had people meet at places that we could control in the different towns around here. So I was the San Jose marshal, and I believe, Nick, you were the San Francisco?
Rick Moen and I did San Francisco.
Right. And so we had maps there, and we handed them off to everybody who was coming.
Well, we actually met at a Denny's that's just outside the Foster City limits, Foster City city limits, which meant also that it was just outside the Foster City police jurisdiction, which meant that any incidents that happened at the meeting point happened in the jurisdiction of San Mateo, and if they told us to get lost, we'd say, "Fine, we're going to Foster City, bye."
It's sort of the Dukes of Hazzard method of avoiding the cops. So,
well, actually, we marched on the other side of this building. We marched around and up onto the parking structure that's up there. And that's where Microsoft had a reception laid out for us with drinks and a big sign that said, Microsoft welcomes the open source community. And the local news cameras got shots of Eric Raymond and the Microsoft representative. The Microsoft story seemed to mostly be that this was not an issue for Microsoft, but rather from the OEMs. So we all needed to go back to our computer manufacturers and try yet again to try and get a refund from them. We responded to them saying, that we've tried that, it's not possible. We need Microsoft to take action at this point. And they just repeated the tagline over and over again. You need to go to the OEMs, the manufacturers, and get your refunds there.
We had about 150 people, probably about half of which had signs and such.
Well, we ended up actually right in this courtyard here. Basically, we originally gathered outside. Various people sent groups in. People from the FreeBSD camp sent a couple folks in. We had Eric Raymond and Chris actually tried to go up eventually. And,
they had blocked the elevators off to us.
Where were their offices?
Their offices were right up here on the 9th floor. We got some really nice press out of it. And we think as a result, Toshiba made it possible for you to buy laptops without the operating system on it. So it's a small victory, but, well,
and even now, companies such as IBM and a lot of other computer manufacturers are allowing you now to buy machines that don't have Windows on them.
When I was a kid and I went to school, the teachers were trying to teach us to share. They said if you bring some candy, you can't eat it all yourself, you've got to share it with the other kids. But now the administration says teachers should be teaching kids to say yes to licensing. If you bring some software to school, oh no, don't share it. Sharing means you're a pirate. Sharing means you'll be put in jail. That's not the way society should work. We need the goodwill, the willingness to help other people, at least when it's not too hard, because that's the basis of society. That's the fundamental resource that gives us a society instead of a dog-eat-dog jungle.
So what about people that say that if you have rampant piracy, it'll eliminate the profit motive and then the creative work software will not be...
Well, they're wrong on both counts. For one thing, people are making a profit from developing free software, but for another, the freedom to have a community is more important.
People that casually look at open source free software and think, well, because you're supposed to share and do it for people's goodwill, doesn't that seem somewhat communist? What's your response?
Absolute nonsense. It makes me really angry when people do that.
Well, back in 1989, actually, communism would have been a compliment. The word that people were using at that time was crazy. I wanted them to use capitalism.
Communism is an ideology that forces people to share. If you don't share, you get thrown in jail or killed.
In 1990, we got a visit from a director of an institute in Moscow University. And actually, I saw him in Helsinki just 2 weeks ago. But in any event, he came by, and Richard Stallman had suggested that he visit Cygnus because he was interested in understanding how the free software model might apply to stimulating entrepreneurial innovation in Russia, of all places. And we had been kind of secretive about our business plan because we weren't really sure that it was going to work, and we didn't want to look too stupid if it failed. But I was very, very open with him, and the more I told him, the more he started shaking his head like this. And I finally said, what's wrong? And he said, this sounds too much like communism to be successful in Russia.
You go to a gulag and end up in a mass grave with a bullet in the back of your head. Open source is not communism because it doesn't force people.
Karl Marx did not invent helping your neighbor. It's not communist to have a commons. A commons existed long before communism as a philosophy of government. There are many commons in our lives. For example, we drive on the highway, something that is maintained for our common good.
Actually, labeling our business model means that it misses the point a little bit. Whether it's communist or whether it's capitalist, the label doesn't matter. The real question is, how much value can you deliver? How scalable is the business? What kind of problems, what kind of rate of innovation can you sustain? And then however you want to label that is really up to you.